The entire city was searching for a missing royal heir, but the only man who could have found her was too busy worrying about his next meal. Rain tapped against the rust-streaked glass of Orbital District 9 like 1,000 impatient fingers. Neon signs flickered through the downpour, painting the narrow streets in shades of blue, red, and fading gold. High above the city, traffic lanes glowed like rivers of light as cargo shuttles crossed the night sky. Most people never looked up anymore. Life in the lower districts taught you that the stars belonged to somebody else. Nathan Cole pulled the collar of his worn gray jacket higher against the cold drizzle as he walked beneath the crowded transit platforms. Water dripped from exposed pipes overhead. The smell of engine coolant mixed with fried food and wet concrete. It was the smell of home. Not a good home, but home all the same. A massive holographic billboard suddenly flashed across the side of a nearby tower. The image showed an elegant blue-skinned woman framed by golden symbols. Below her face, bold letters scrolled across the screen. Missing. Imperial search continues. Report any information immediately. Nathan barely glanced at it. Rich people disappeared all the time. Politicians disappeared. Executives disappeared. Royal families disappeared. None of it changed the rent. None of it lowered food prices. None of it mattered much when your bank account was nearly empty. He stepped around a puddle and checked the balance on his old wrist terminal. The number glowed faintly. 12 credits and 40 cents. He let out a dry laugh. 12 credits. That was all he had left after 3 months of searching for work. 3 months of rejection notices. 3 months of employers telling him they needed younger workers, cheaper workers, workers with fewer questions, and more connections. The city moved around him in a blur of umbrellas and hurried footsteps. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody slowed down. Everybody was carrying their own problems. A siren echoed somewhere in the distance. Moments later, 2 sleek security drones streaked overhead, scanning rooftops with bright, white beams. More searching. More announcements. More urgency surrounding someone Nathan would never meet. The rain intensified. He ducked beneath the awning of a small food stand squeezed between a repair shop and a closed pharmacy. The owner recognized him immediately. Nathan, the older man said. You look like hell. That's because I can't afford the deluxe version. The owner chuckled. What can I get you? Nathan stared at the menu. Most of the items were beyond what he could spend. His stomach tightened as the smell of warm broth drifted through the air. He hadn't eaten since early that morning. Just the basic meal, he finally said. The 12-credit special. The owner hesitated, then nodded. A few minutes later, Nathan accepted a small insulated container. Steam escaped when he opened it. Vegetable stew. Fresh bread. Nothing fancy. Nothing memorable. But for the first time all day, it smelled wonderful. The warmth seeped into his cold hands. For a moment, standing beneath the shelter while rain hammered the streets around him, it felt like things might be okay. Then every screen in the district suddenly changed. Conversations stopped. People looked up. A citywide emergency alert appeared across hundreds of displays at once. Imperial search expanded. All districts subject to immediate inspection. Report suspicious individuals. Security vessels were already descending through the clouds above the city. Their lights cut through the rain like silent stars. Nathan watched them for a few seconds before lowering his eyes to the meal in his hands. Whatever was happening out there belonged to another world. He didn't know that somewhere nearby, sitting alone in the storm with nowhere to go, the woman everyone was searching for was only a few blocks away. Nathan stepped away from the food stand and pulled his jacket tighter as the rain continued to sweep across the district. The insulated container warmed his hands, but the comfort did not reach much farther than that. 12 credits gone. Account empty. Tomorrow was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, at least, he would eat. He moved through the crowded street beneath a maze of steel walkways and humming transit rails. Above him, enormous searchlights drifted through the clouds. Security vessels continued their slow patrol across the skyline, their engines producing a low vibration that seemed to settle into the bones of the city itself. Everywhere he looked, screens displayed the same alert. Missing royal heir. Imperial search expanded. Citizens were encouraged to cooperate. Nathan barely paid attention. The wealthy always had people searching for them. The rest of the galaxy usually had to search for themselves. A cold gust swept through the alley between 2 apartment towers. Nathan stopped beneath another awning and finally opened the container. Steam curled upward into the rainy night. The smell of vegetables and fresh bread immediately made his stomach growl. He smiled despite himself. It was not much, but it was enough. He broke off a piece of bread and was about to take his first bite when movement caught his eye across the street. Someone sat alone beneath a damaged transit shelter. At first he almost missed her. Most people did. Pedestrians hurried past without slowing down. A few glanced in her direction before quickly looking away. She sat perfectly still, her shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. Rain leaked through the cracked roof above her. Even from 30 feet away, Nathan could tell she was not human. Her skin carried a deep blue tone, though it looked dull beneath the weak station lights. A thin gray cloak covered most of her body. Her head remained lowered. For several moments Nathan simply watched. The city was full of people who needed help. He could not save all of them. He could barely help himself. Yet something felt unusual. It was not her appearance. Orbital District 9 was home to dozens of species. It was the way she sat. Quiet. Composed. Almost dignified. Like someone pretending to belong somewhere she clearly did not. Nathan shook his head. None of his business. He turned away and started walking. 3 steps later he stopped. The bread felt heavier in his hand than it should have. He glanced back again. She had not moved. Around her, people rushed through the rain carrying groceries, packages, umbrellas, and warm meals. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody acknowledged her existence. Nathan sighed softly. Some instincts were impossible to ignore. He crossed the street, dodging puddles and streams of runoff water. As he approached, he noticed details he had missed from a distance. The cloak was old but carefully maintained. Her hands were trembling slightly from the cold. Most surprising of all were her eyes when she finally looked up. They were violet, bright, intelligent. Nothing about them matched the hopeless expression he expected to find. For a second they locked eyes. Neither spoke. Rain drummed against the shelter roof. Somewhere overhead, another security vessel passed through the clouds. Nathan glanced at the untouched meal in his hand, then back at the stranger sitting alone in the storm. He had a feeling that whatever happened next would cost him his dinner. He just did not know yet how much more it might cost than that. The woman studied him carefully as he stepped beneath the shelter. Up close, she looked even more exhausted than he had first imagined. Tiny droplets of rain clung to strands of silver-white hair that had escaped from beneath her hood. The cloak around her shoulders was damp from hours in the storm. Yet there was something strangely composed about her posture. She sat straight despite the cold, calm despite her circumstances. Nathan held up the food container awkwardly. "You look like you could use this more than I can." Her violet eyes shifted from the meal to his face. For a moment, she did not reach for it. "You assume much, human," she said quietly. Her voice was smooth and measured, carrying an accent Nathan could not place. "I assume you have not eaten recently." The corner of her mouth moved ever so slightly. "And what makes you believe that?" Nathan laughed softly. "Because I know what hungry looks like." The answer seemed to catch her off guard. She lowered her gaze briefly before looking back at him. Around them, crowds continued flowing through the district. Nobody paid attention to the conversation taking place inside the leaking shelter. Nathan opened the container and placed it between them on the bench. Steam rose into the cool night air. "Go ahead," he said. "There is enough for 2. Technically, that was not true. There was barely enough for 1. But he chose not to mention that detail. The woman hesitated before accepting a small piece of bread. Her movements were surprisingly careful, almost formal. She examined it for a second before taking a bite. Nathan sat beside her and began eating the stew more slowly than he normally would. The warmth felt wonderful after hours in the rain. For several minutes, neither spoke. The city provided plenty of noise on its own. Shuttle engines echoed overhead. Transit rails hummed. Distant announcements drifted through the damp air. Across the street, another public screen displayed the same emergency alert. Search teams, royal notices, expanding patrol zones. The woman followed Nathan's gaze toward the screen. "Does that concern you?" she asked. Nathan shrugged. "Not really. An entire city is searching for someone. Then I hope they find her. That is all." He nodded. "Whoever she is, she probably matters to a lot of people. But I do not know her. Right now I am more concerned about making rent next week." The woman stared at him as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You speak honestly. Most people do." Her expression suggested she strongly disagreed. Nathan smiled and offered her another piece of bread. This time she accepted immediately. "What about you?" he asked. "Anybody looking for you tonight?" Something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear. Not exactly sadness. Something deeper. Older. "Perhaps," she answered. "Then they should probably search harder." To his surprise, she laughed. It was a small sound. Brief. But genuine. Nathan realized it was the first time he had heard her laugh. For some reason, that felt important. Above the district, another formation of search vessels emerged through the clouds. Their lights swept across rooftops and towers before disappearing into the rain. The woman watched them silently. Nathan noticed that her fingers tightened slightly around the remaining piece of bread. Whatever story had brought her here, it was clearly larger than she wanted to admit. But Nathan had never been the type to force answers from people. Sometimes kindness meant sharing food. Sometimes it meant allowing someone to keep their secrets. The rain gradually softened into a mist that drifted through the glow of the city lights. Nathan leaned back against the shelter bench and looked out across the crowded avenue. Most storefronts were beginning to close for the night. Metal shutters rolled down over windows. Delivery drones made their final routes. The district was settling into the uneasy quiet that came before midnight. Beside him, the woman finished the last piece of bread and carefully folded the empty wrapper as though it held value. Nathan noticed the gesture. Most hungry people would have tossed it away without thinking. "You treat a 12-credit meal like it came from a royal banquet," he said with a smile. Her eyes shifted toward him. "Perhaps because I understand what it cost." Nathan laughed softly. "Trust me, it did not cost much. I do not mean credits." The answer lingered between them. Nathan looked away first. For some reason, he felt she understood more about him than she should. The woman studied the rain for several seconds before speaking again. "May I ask you something?" "Sure. If a person possessed great wealth, would that make them more valuable than someone who has nothing?" Nathan shrugged. "Depends on who you ask. I am asking you." He considered the question. "Money solves problems. I would not mind having some. But it does not tell you much about a person." She nodded slowly. "And if that same person possessed power?" "Same answer." "Influence?" "Same answer." Her expression became thoughtful. "Then how do you measure someone's worth?" Nathan looked out at the people moving through the street. A mechanic helping an elderly traveler carry a heavy bag. A tired mother holding the hand of a sleepy child. Two sanitation workers sharing coffee beside a maintenance truck. Ordinary people. Invisible people. "I guess by what they do when nobody is watching," he finally said. The woman became very still. "That is an unusual answer." "Maybe, but it is the one I have got." Above them, another emergency broadcast echoed across the district speakers. Citizens were reminded to report suspicious activity. Additional search teams had been deployed. Nathan rolled his eyes. Whoever they are looking for must be important. The woman stared toward the distant lights of the upper city. What if that person was responsible for the lives of millions? Nathan frowned. "That sounds exhausting." To his surprise, she smiled. A genuine smile this time. Warm, brief, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "You are different from most people I have met." That is usually not a compliment. "I believe it is." A sudden gust of wind swept through the shelter. The temperature dropped noticeably. Nathan noticed the woman shiver despite her effort to hide it. Without thinking, he removed his jacket and held it out. "Take this." Her eyes widened. "No, you are freezing. And you are not. I have survived worse." She looked at the jacket but made no move to accept it. "You have already shared your meal." "Then I am on a generosity streak tonight." For the first time since meeting her, she seemed genuinely uncertain. Finally, she accepted the jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The oversized fabric nearly swallowed her smaller frame. Nathan immediately felt the cold bite through his shirt, but he ignored it. The woman lowered her eyes to the worn jacket resting around her. Her fingers brushed the faded fabric carefully, almost reverently. Somewhere deep within the city, distant sirens sounded again. Searchlights crossed the clouds overhead. Yet beneath the shelter, neither of them noticed. For a few quiet moments, the entire galaxy seemed very far away. The mist continued drifting through the district long after the rain had faded. Water still clung to the metal railings and cracked pavement, reflecting the glow of neon advertisements in shimmering colors. Nathan folded his arms against the cold and watched the traffic lanes overhead. Without his jacket, the night felt considerably colder, but he did not regret the decision. Beside him, the woman sat wrapped in the worn fabric, her hands hidden inside the oversized sleeves. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. It reminded Nathan of evenings from years ago when life had been simpler and conversations did not always need a purpose. Eventually, the woman looked toward him. "You are not what I expected." Nathan chuckled. "That depends on what you expected." Someone more concerned with himself. That would probably be the smarter option. Her gaze lingered on him. "Yet you continue choosing otherwise." Nathan thought about that for a moment. The city was full of people who would call his choices foolish. Maybe they were right. Kindness did not pay rent. Compassion did not refill empty bank accounts. Generosity certainly did not improve employment prospects. Still, he could never quite convince himself to stop caring. My father used to tell me something, he said. He said that hard times reveal who you are when all the easy excuses disappear. The woman listened carefully. And who are you? Nathan smiled faintly, still trying to figure that out. A distant shuttle descended through the clouds, its landing thrusters casting pale light across nearby rooftops. The woman followed it with her eyes. Do you ever wish your life had been different? She asked quietly. Nathan laughed. Only on weekdays. For the second time that night, she laughed with him. The sound seemed brighter now, less guarded. That was not a serious answer. It was mostly serious. He leaned back against the bench. Sure, there are things I would change. Better jobs, better luck, fewer mistakes. But everybody has a list like that. Even those with power? Especially those with power. The woman became thoughtful again. You truly believe that? I think being important probably creates different problems, not fewer problems. Her violet eyes searched his face. And if someone carried responsibilities beyond anything you could imagine? Nathan shrugged. Then I would hope they had somebody they could talk to once in a while. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked away toward the glowing city skyline. The expression in her eyes softened with something that looked surprisingly close to sadness. Nathan pretended not to notice. Some wounds were invisible. Some questions did not need answers. Above them, another emergency broadcast illuminated nearby screens. Search operations would continue through the night. Additional patrols had entered the district. Citizens were encouraged to remain alert. The woman watched the announcement in silence. Nathan noticed her fingers tighten around the sleeve of his jacket. You know, he said casually. Whoever they are searching for must be having a terrible night. Her eyes shifted toward him. Why do you say that? Because being chased by half the city sounds exhausting. For a brief moment something flickered across her face. Amusement, relief, gratitude. Nathan could not tell which. Perhaps all three. Then the expression vanished as quickly as it appeared. The mist drifted between the towers. Searchlights crossed the clouds above. And for the first time since they met, the woman seemed less like a stranger hiding from the world and more like someone who had finally found a place to rest, if only for a little while. The night deepened around Orbital District 9. Most of the crowds had disappeared, leaving only scattered travelers and late-shift workers moving through the damp streets. The glow from storefront signs reflected across puddles like fractured stars. Nathan rubbed his hands together to keep warm and glanced toward the woman beside him. Despite wearing his jacket, she still looked tired. Not physically tired alone. There was a heaviness in her eyes that seemed older than the city itself. You should probably find somewhere indoors before morning, he said. The temperature is going to drop another 10 degrees. She looked at him curiously. And where will you go? Nathan smiled. Home. Assuming my landlord has not changed the access code again. Your residence is nearby? About 15 minutes if I cut through the maintenance corridor. She nodded slowly. Then her gaze drifted toward a family passing through the plaza. A young child sat on his father's shoulders while laughing at something only children could find funny. The woman watched them until they disappeared around a corner. Do you ever think about leaving? She asked quietly. Leaving the city? Nathan shrugged. Sometimes. Why do you stay? He considered the question. Because hope is cheaper than relocation permits. The answer earned another faint smile. You hide wisdom inside jokes. That is because nobody listens when you say serious things seriously. For a while they simply listened to the city. Somewhere nearby, a transit train rattled across elevated tracks. Ventilation systems hummed through the walls of surrounding buildings. Above it all, the distant sound of patrol vessels continued moving through the clouds. The search had not slowed. If anything, it seemed more intense than before. More lights, more announcements, more urgency. The woman stared toward the sky. What would you do, she asked, if you discovered that someone had deceived you about who they were? Nathan tilted his head. Depends on why they lied. What if they believed they had no choice? Then I would probably hear their explanation before getting angry. Her eyes lowered. Even if the truth changed everything? Nathan laughed softly. Trust me, my life does not have enough important things in it for everything to change. The woman looked as though she wanted to say something else. Instead, she remained silent. A cold breeze swept through the shelter. Nathan noticed her suppress a shiver despite the jacket. Without hesitation, he stood. Come on. She blinked in surprise. Where are we going? There is a 24-hour maintenance cafe 2 blocks from here. The coffee is terrible, but the heater works. You do not have any money left. Nathan stared at her. That is a strangely specific observation. For the first time, genuine embarrassment crossed her face. You mentioned your account earlier. Right. He smiled. Well, the owner owes me a favor. Long story. The woman rose slowly from the bench. For a moment she seemed uncertain, almost overwhelmed by the invitation. Then she nodded. Together they stepped out from beneath the shelter and into the cool night air. The city stretched endlessly around them, bright and restless beneath the drifting clouds. Searchlights continued scanning the skyline. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were searching for a missing heir. Yet none of them realized she was walking quietly through the streets beside an unemployed man who had nothing left to give except kindness. The maintenance cafe sat beneath an aging transit hub where thousands of commuters passed each day without ever noticing it. Its faded sign buzzed softly in the darkness, and warm yellow light spilled across the sidewalk through fogged windows. Nathan pushed open the door, and a wave of heat immediately washed over them. The smell of coffee, machine oil, and fresh bread filled the air. It was not fancy, but it felt welcoming. Nathan, called an older man from behind the counter. You look colder every time I see you. That is because the weather keeps cheating, Nathan replied. The owner laughed and slid 2 steaming mugs onto the counter without being asked. Take a table. The woman looked surprised as they sat near the window. You said he owed you a favor. I repaired his refrigeration unit 3 years ago. That is all. Nathan nodded. Apparently, saving a man from losing 1,200 pounds of frozen inventory buys a lot of coffee. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Steam drifted upward between them. For a moment, she simply stared into the swirling surface. The warm light softened the tired lines around her eyes. Nathan realized this was the first time he had seen her somewhere that felt safe. Better, he asked. Much. Outside, searchlights continued sweeping across the city skyline. Every few minutes, another security craft crossed overhead. Inside the cafe, however, the galaxy felt quieter. Smaller. Human. The woman studied him over the rim of her cup. You help people often, do not you? Nathan shrugged. Not really. You gave away your dinner. You looked hungry. You gave away your jacket. You looked cold. You invited a complete stranger somewhere warm. Nathan smiled. You looked like you needed a friend. The answer seemed to affect her more than the others. She lowered her gaze to the coffee again. Several seconds passed before she spoke. What if I told you that helping me could create difficulties for you? Nathan leaned back in his chair. That sounds very mysterious. I am serious. Then I would probably ask whether those difficulties are happening tonight. She hesitated. No. Then tomorrow can argue with itself when it gets here. For the first time all evening, she appeared genuinely speechless. Nathan took a sip of coffee and looked out the window. A pair of patrol vehicles rolled through the intersection outside. Their bright scanners illuminated buildings, alleys, and passing pedestrians. The search was still growing. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. What is your name? The question lingered in the air. She seemed caught off guard. Nathan realized they had spent hours talking without exchanging the simplest information. Finally, she answered. Lyra. It was not her real name. Nathan somehow knew that immediately. Yet he also knew she wanted it to be enough for now. Nice to meet you, Lyra. She smiled softly. And you, Nathan? Hearing his name spoken in her voice felt strangely meaningful. As midnight approached, the cafe grew quieter. A few customers left. Chairs were stacked onto empty tables. Beyond the window, the city continued searching for someone important. Yet sitting across from Nathan, wrapped in his worn jacket and holding a cup of coffee between her hands, the missing woman found herself wishing the night would last just a little longer. When they finally stepped out of the cafe, the city felt different. The air was colder. The streets were quieter. Even the endless hum of Orbital District 9 seemed subdued beneath the weight of the late hour. Nathan walked beside Lyra beneath rows of dim transit lights, while thin ribbons of fog drifted between the buildings. Neither spoke much. The silence no longer felt awkward. It felt familiar, comfortable, like something neither of them wanted to disturb. They reached the intersection where they would eventually part ways. Nathan stopped beside a weathered information kiosk whose screen flickered with outdated advertisements. Well, he said, rubbing his hands together against the cold. I should probably head home before my landlord decides I have abandoned the apartment. Lyra smiled faintly. And I should continue my journey. Nathan nodded. Then I guess this is goodbye. The words seemed to linger longer than either expected. For a moment, Lyra simply looked at him. The city lights reflected in her violet eyes. There was gratitude there. Sadness too. And something else Nathan could not quite identify. Thank you, she said quietly. For the meal, the jacket, the coffee, the conversation. Nathan shrugged. It was not exactly a grand rescue. No, she replied. It was something much rarer. Before he could ask what she meant, a low vibration rolled through the street beneath their feet. Nathan frowned and looked upward. The sound grew louder, deeper, more powerful. Every nearby window reflected sudden movement in the clouds above. Then the fog itself began glowing. Blue light spilled across rooftops. Engines thundered somewhere overhead. Pedestrians stopped walking. People emerged from storefronts. Faces turned toward the sky. Nathan followed their gaze. His jaw slowly dropped. Massive starships descended through the clouds. Not one vessel. Not two. An entire formation. Their polished hulls gleamed beneath the city lights like floating mountains of silver and gold. Symbols he had never seen before burned across their sides. Elegant. Regal. Impossible to ignore. The lead ship hovered directly above the district. Searchlights swept across the streets below. Traffic froze. Conversations died. Every screen in sight suddenly changed. Emergency alerts vanished. Advertisements disappeared. The same symbol now filled every display. Nathan heard gasps around him. Citizens stared in disbelief. A voice echoed from public speakers across the district. Royal Command presence confirmed. Nathan slowly turned toward Lyra. She was no longer looking at the ships. She was looking at him. Her expression had changed. Not colder, not distant, simply resigned, as though a moment she had hoped to delay had finally arrived. Lyra, Nathan said carefully, do you want to tell me what is happening? Before she could answer, dozens of smaller transports descended onto the avenue ahead. Their landing lights illuminated the street. Uniformed figures emerged in perfect formation. Tall, disciplined, wearing ceremonial armor that shimmered beneath the glow of the ships above. Every person nearby stepped backward instinctively. Nathan remained frozen. The guards advanced several yards before stopping. Then something even stranger happened. Every single one of them lowered their heads. Not to the crowd, not to the ships, to the woman standing beside him. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, almost sadly. Then she opened them again and met Nathan's stunned gaze. I wanted one normal night, she said softly. Just one. For several seconds Nathan could not move. The avenue had become completely silent. Thousands of lights reflected from polished armor and hovering ships. Yet all he could hear was the distant hum of engines above the clouds. The woman he had shared a meal with stood calmly at the center of it all. The oversized jacket still rested on her shoulders. His jacket. One of the armored officers stepped forward and lowered himself to one knee. Your Highness, he said, thank the stars we found you. Around him, every member of the royal escort mirrored the gesture. Nathan stared at Lyra, or whatever her real name was. Suddenly, every strange question she had asked made sense. Every careful answer. Every glance toward the search vessels. Every moment of hesitation. You are the missing heir, he said quietly. She nodded once. My name is Princess Lysra Vale. The words settled over the street like falling snow. Nearby citizens gasped. Some stepped backward. Others simply stood frozen in disbelief. Nathan looked at the enormous fleet above them, and then back at the woman he had met beneath a leaking shelter. You could have told me. Lysra smiled sadly. Would anything have happened differently if I had? Nathan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. After a moment, he shook his head. No, probably not. Something softened in her expression. Relief, perhaps. The commander rose and approached carefully. Your Highness, the Imperial Council has been in chaos for 36 hours. Entire sectors have been searching for you. I know, Lysra replied. And yet here you are, the commander said, glancing briefly toward Nathan. Lysra followed his gaze. Exactly where I needed to be. Confusion spread across several faces. Nathan was equally confused. Lysra stepped forward until she stood directly in front of him. The city lights reflected in her eyes. There is something you deserve to know. Nathan folded his arms. I am listening. This was not merely an escape. Her voice remained calm. For generations, members of my family have participated in a private tradition before assuming full responsibility for the throne. We leave behind our titles and wealth. We walk among ordinary citizens. We learn who people truly are when there is nothing to gain. Nathan blinked. You were testing people? Not intentionally. She shook her head. The purpose is not to judge others. The purpose is to understand them. Her eyes lowered briefly toward the worn jacket around her shoulders. Most people ignored me. Some pitied me. A few offered assistance because they expected recognition. Then she looked directly at him. You were the only person who helped without asking for anything in return. Nathan felt unexpectedly embarrassed. I gave you a cheap meal and a jacket. You gave me dignity. The words carried more weight than any royal announcement. Around them, nobody spoke. Even the commander remained silent. Lysera removed the jacket carefully and held it against her chest. Tonight, I met thousands of people searching for a princess, she said softly. But only one person saw a stranger sitting alone in the rain. Nathan looked away for a moment, overwhelmed by the attention. When he finally looked back, Lysera was smiling. Not as a royal heir. Not as the future ruler of an empire. Just as the woman who had shared coffee in a small maintenance cafe. Empires are built by power, she said. But they survive because of kindness. Above them, the stars glimmered between breaks in the clouds. And for the first time in a very long while, Nathan Cole felt that perhaps the universe was not nearly as large or as lonely as he had once believed.